Boom. Everyone should be seeing black market data, yeah? All right. It's not often that shit works. I'm just going to say. Okay. So this is me in dark mode. Right now, I'm an international hip hop producer. Solidarity with my brothers and sisters out there with all the lives that matter, especially InfoSec lives. Those matter the most, as far as I'm concerned. Anyways, lead architect for Cyber Titan, which is going down in 8 days from now. We are going to qualify out of 110 teams. The top 10 cyber teams in Canada are competing for the top award. I've been the lead architect of that, throwing all the types of different challenges are. And this one I'm super excited about because this challenge has an element that everyone that is in InfoSec or IT can really relate to. In addition to vulnerability management and forensics, we're throwing 10 service tickets at them as they try and do their digital forensics. They're going to get interrupted by Bob from accounting who needs a password reset, because that's real life in cyber, man. So I'm super pumped about that. Active on Twitter, yes I am, and in the media. DEFCON 9 was my first DEFCON. You always remember your first, you know what I mean. And yeah, I'm at Hobbit on Twitter. And
sorry, Ian. Sorry, yeah. You who on Twitter?
I'm a fat_Hobbit. Yeah, and that's my man, MC Mike Angry Thompson tonight. He is my wingman, my mate on this one, because this we got a lot of ground to cover, ladies and gentlemen. So let's get right into it. I am going to go quickly through the fact that I also have a corporate mode and something I'm not proud of, but hey, we all got to make some money somehow, right? Okay, so I did some shit a while back, and it got published in PC Magazine, and it was about unraveling an APT group. I called them Magdalena Solora. I had some amazing support from the community. Shout out to the Kaspersky team and their ability to sort of verify a lot of my findings on this. I threw this in there not just because I wanted to have some street cred with y'all, but I also wanted to point out that as part of this community, you have to contribute, you have to publish your research, okay? And that's my belief, is that together, through this research, through sharing and not throwing each other under the bus on Twitter, but actually being a supportive community, we can actually defeat the bad guys. Because the more we fight amongst ourselves, the more the bad guys are going to win, and they're going to hand our asses to us in cyberspace, like we've seen through the whole COVID-19. Mike, I want your thoughts on the idea of potentially a couple seconds, couple minutes, if you will, on the current banality of Twitter.
Yeah, where can I start? Blimey. Right, so banality. So people that are tweeting rubbish, shit posting is a thing on Twitter. We're all familiar with it, and we all do it. I do it. But there comes a point when you have to actually start contributing stuff, and that becomes all the more important if you are also in a position of criticizing other people. And what we're seeing a lot of is people criticizing people but not contributing anything, whether it be via sharing research, sharing insights, experience, and all that kind of stuff. And there appears to be quite a rise of this, and it's making Twitter quite a difficult place to be, on top of how difficult a place it already bloody well is. So that's a thing. We're seeing a lot of offense being taken by people on Twitter. I was engaged in a really big battle over the last week around a colleague who'd created a CTF program for kids, and he got a lot of criticism and downright accusations leveled at him about it, when it was really quite unnecessary. It distracted a lot of people away from doing the good stuff that we're all here to do. And it makes social media a pretty hard place to be at times, but it's like a case of better the devil you know, because what else have we got at this moment in time? So yeah, Twitter in particular can be quite a nasty battlefield at times, but then again, it's a paradox. It's the one thing that pulls us apart, but it's also the one thing that draws us together. So that's my experience.
I think that's excellent. And, you know, just to keep in mind is that I think everybody's stress level with COVID-19 and the work from home, mandated work from home, the isolation, I think that took a huge effect and made everyone, I think, a little bit more sensitive and a little bit more, I got to be honest, I get a little pokey, I get a little drunk, I get a little bit angry. It happens to every one of us. So cool. Keeping it real. So one of my pet peeves, and I continually try to call this out where I can, is that hackers are not the problem in our InfoSec community. And I know I'm probably preaching to a lot of the converted right now, but I just want to say, make an effort to try and change the definition of what hacking is, because as you can see, hackers, and hacking have a whole bunch of different connotations. And the actual ability to hack, you can hack all sorts of things. Like, for instance, I can hack my way out of a bar tab pretty easily by exiting at the appropriate time. So there are some good things, there are some not so great things, but I really do like, and I know, Mike, you've got, maybe not the greatest feeling about Marcus, but I'm going to say his book, Tribe of Hackers, at least when I pulled it together, I really thought that what he was talking about is a collective community with good, bad, and ugly within that community, but not everyone that is hacking is actually being a criminal.
Ian,
So,
before you continue, mate, just before you continue, sorry to interrupt you.
No.
You have the con, and I believe that there are people trying to get in the room, so I think you need to let them in.
Oh, I do? Oh, Jesus. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I think it's because we've...
Okay, I got to, so I got a participant. Oh, okay. Admit and admit. All right.
Cheers.
Perfect. We got some folks in. Sorry about that. I had the con there, and now you're in. You didn't miss anything except AppSec bloke. Here's the mandatory corporate slide, yada, yada, yada. Sidejax is awesome. Please follow us. We put out a lot of great reports. End of. Okay. So to set the stage, if you will, about cyber criminality, we do need to go to the doxer himself, Brian Krebs. And despite his being somewhat of a controversial figure overall in the community, I'm going to say he came up with this diagram about the monetization of cyber. Okay, and this, to a certain extent, is all of the different kind of themes and ideas around the monetization of a hacked computer, be it a government supercomputer infrastructure or your home PC, and businesses and organizations of all shapes, sizes, and colors in between, right? So I want to put that up there because at the end of the day, the core takeaway from this is that cyber criminals have innovated. Cyber criminals have figured out how to avoid the long arm of the law in a lot of cases by partitioning out the whole crime. So to give you an example, like break, enter, and theft is a really great example, right? You have the breaking of some sort of physical lock and device. You've got entering into the premises, and then you've got the theft of what is in that place, right? Break, enter, and theft. Got it, right? But what happens if we're in a world where one person does the breaking, one person does the entering, and then another person does the thieving, right? So you can charge all three of them, but here's the problem. When you get to the legal system and you start discussing who out of those three dastardly cyber criminals is the most criminal, you now have these defenses where, well, I don't know, I just sold the malware. I didn't expect anyone to use it for criminal activities, right? So we do have a major problem with the structure of how cyber criminal organizations are set up in order to actually bring charges. This is why, and we'll get into it in a little bit, you see a lot of indictments that are conspiracy and wire fraud and fraud, because juries understand what that is. But if you talk about technical computer crime, like Computer Misuse Act, Computer Fraud and Abuse Act in the United States, it becomes very confusing to a jury. And let's not forget that the juries are made up of probably internet people with internet skills, approximately at my mother's level of skill set, which is to say, probably not as literate as my beloved audience. Mike, you got any ideas on this diagram and not Mr. Brian Krebs?
The diagram is actually pretty cool. As a mind map, it's pretty spot on. I have a general question really to ask you, Ian, for your thoughts, which is, once a data set has been exposed and it appears on the dark web, or black market, whatever you want to call it, does its value immediately start to depreciate? simply because it's been exposed, it's been sold once, it's then become shared publicly, and so on and so forth. I think a 0 day, in air quotes, 0 day data has value in my opinion. But then as time passes, the inherent value of the data surely diminishes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's like, that's why Marriott has to be annually breached every year in order for the update to everyone's profiles, right? So no, you're 100% right. This data decays over time, and then savvy cyber criminals will rebundle it. And we saw this during the COVID-19, where all of a sudden a data set, it was NHS data, it was government data. Turns out our man, Troy Hunt, well, he says, yeah, you know what, this was all old shit that somebody's rebundled and made a big announcement. To be honest, Have I Been Pawned, one of my favorite services, has done more to lower the price of illicitly disclosed data than any other service out there on the internet. Because as soon as that data comes public, people change their passwords, people change, over time, especially in the UK. Some of us, because we're avoiding the law, are moving every year. There's a lot of turnover and stuff like that in those data sets. So you're 100% correct, Mike, on that as well. Okay.
Well, just before you continue on the matter of Brian Krebs, he did dox not Dan and his mate, which is quite a famous incident from, was it last year, 2019, when that happened?
Of which he's never apologized, and he really should, because it's just not cool, bro.
It's not cool. But after I went after him on Twitter, which I did, along with a lot of other people, he started following me on Twitter, and he still does, which is kind of weird.
Respect, bro.
I don't know if it's a respect thing or I've got something to worry about, but there we go. But yeah, do carry on.
The AppSec bloke data deposit, right? Data.
Yeah.
Okay, so this slide's pretty self-explanatory. Cyber criminals are still dicks. That hasn't changed. These indictments go way back 1999 to 2014, where people were popping PBXs to turn them into free long-distance services to immigrant communities, of which the immigrant communities were being charged for, right? Along came Skype, and all of a sudden that shit changed. But the last iteration was really the interesting one, is what they did is they would still pop the PBXs, but then they would get a whole bunch of people to dial the PBX outbound to 1-900 numbers that charge per minute, racking up a giant bill for the company and making them a whole ton of money, right? So what I'm trying to talk about this is the innovation, right? And way back in the day, 2010, the fake AV scan, which was all that was, man, was a pop-up ad that just came up on your computer scaring you, saying, you have porn, or we've detected a virus, or whatever. They back-ended into a call center. It got so bad that was the first time Canada had to send somebody to India to sort that out. We sent a Mountie out there and, arrested a bunch of people. But I'm just saying, like, these scams, some of them 10 years old, some of them like nearing 20 years old now, are still around, right? Okay. So one thing you got to know about cybercrime is there is a sheriff in town here, okay? And it is the Department of Justice. If you're interested in this, I wrote a paper about it, but they will basically slap the handcuffs on anybody. American citizen, doesn't matter. Okay. And there's actually a special caveat, which means if you fall into the hands of the United States and you happen to not be an American citizen, you do not get the protections of the American Constitution. Okay. So it's really not a good scene whatsoever. And as we know, in the case of Lori Love, it is not a good time in an American pound you in the ass federal prison. Okay. It is nasty. But here we have 4 sets of indictments for all sorts of crazy stuff, right? We've got the Jamaican lottery, which was cool. It was a lottery scam run out of Jamaica. Only thing was, nobody ever won the lottery. The only people that did were the cyber criminals, okay? Kind of a cool, neat scam, right? That got shut down. Indian citizens running fake call centers. Again, it got so bad that Canada had to send, for the second time, a Mountie to India to get that all cleaned up. Right? And then we have a couple of really famous ones, man. Trim, who ran one of the largest torrent sites in the world, Kick-Ass Torrents, arrested when he was coming from Ukraine to Poland. He's still sitting in jail in Poland waiting an extradition hearing to the United States. His only crime, which isn't actually a crime in Ukraine, there isn't a criminal copyright statute like the DMCA. Again, his crime, he made some money by putting ads on his website. So they're doing them for wire fraud or wire fraud. Same with our man, Kim.com. Again, a pretty controversial figure. They couldn't get him for the actual copyright infringement because he's a New Zealand citizen, but they got him for wire fraud again. So you can see the way that the American justice system is hitting out on all of these people, including people that shouldn't necessarily be governed by the U.S. Criminal Code, right? Okay, so a couple things to share with you guys here, and I'm going to get rid of this because I think it's in the way now when I'm sharing my screen. Maybe is a whole bunch of participant information all on doxing up on the screen. No? Good. Okay, cool. I can see that. You guys can't. So that's good. So basically, these are the kinds of, I would say, silos, if you will, of cybercrime. Affiliated actors, okay, right? What we like to call the insider threat, right? Usually an intimate knowledge of the target environment. Unaffiliated actors, your common cyber criminals that are just looking for an opportunity and are using phishing emails and kind of pretty much a standard setup where there's a bunch of people in, in a country working together as a collective group to try and extract money or drop ransomware on an organization, right? You have these high visibility attacks, right? Very easy to detect. And a lot of them we see are like, you are sitting there going, oh my God, if these people just had been monitoring for failed logins on their external links, for instance. A really great example of a very high visibility attack, password spraying, brute forcing, stuff like that. But so many people are not looking. And then low visibility attacks, very covert attacks, right? Ones that are using very stealthy malware and really sophisticated exfiltration techniques. We'll talk a little bit about them. And then in general, we basically have two motivations, which are not exclusive, right? You can be a patriot for any country. You can be financially motivated, and you can be geopolitically motivated, i.e. you've got some sort of axe to grind, like Anonymous right now with the Minneapolis-St. Paul police, right? Fair enough.
Just a quick one there, Ian.
Yeah.
In 2017, when WannaCry hit, it was basically a ransacking incident. Obviously, it was a ransomware attack, but it was a completely indiscriminate attack.
Yeah.
More recently, the attackers have become far more, I hate using the word sophisticated because it gets thrown around a little bit too freely, but particularly by people that are victims. But what we're now seeing is ransomware being used, but also as part of an exfiltration attack.
Yep, 100%.
So we'll take your data and we'll encrypt it, and we've still got it. You haven't got it anymore, and we're seeing that more and more happening out there in the world in the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I mean they're using it as sort of an incentive to pay, but to try and make sure that you can extract the data from an organization. And I mean the really big one that just occurred about 2 weeks ago, and I actually broke the story because I was reading, if you can believe it or not, Variety magazine online about the entertainment world, and I like to follow like comic books and anime and all that shit. And I come across this article about the law firm that basically does all of this work for the stars and how they got ransomware. And then about 3 days later, this huge story happened. And because apparently Trump also used that law firm when during his commercial endeavors, like The Apprentice and stuff like that, because this is a law firm that deals with like Hollywood stars and stuff like that, they basically threatened to disclose all of these documents about the president of the United States. Well, what was really interesting is the Department of Justice decided, in its weird-ass wisdom, that because this was an attack on the president, they were going to call these guys terrorists, which precluded the law firm legally from paying out the ransom. Not that they should ever pay out the ransom, But I'm just saying that we can see this went full blown crazy, because even the North Korean alleged attack on Sony Pictures was not designated a terrorist act. So this was the first time the Department of Justice came out and said, this is an attack on the president, and therefore it's a terrorist act, and therefore you can't pay the ransom. Very, very interesting perspective.
Absolutely.
So that's a great one. Okay, I'm not going to go through this one in depth. You guys can have the slides after this. Totally happy to share it with all of the attendees tonight. This is an example of an affiliated actor on a high visibility attack. How do we know it was a high visibility attack? Well, he deleted 88 virtual servers, okay, from his own account, from a McDonald's across the street, of which he was VPN'd in, even though he had been let go from the organization once and then hired back as a contractor. Okay, so this was like, this is the one where I kind of sit down and say, listen, this is really a guy that was pretty messed up. He was super angry about the fact that his manager got made redundant, and he was basically to take on all of this work. And I think there was a bit of a very close relationship between him and his manager. But this is just like a shoot your head in the moment place as a business, where you have made a bunch of people redundant and you failed to revoke passwords and revoke their access. So, you know, these affiliated actor situations, a lot of them can be dealt with by buying somebody a cup of coffee and saying, hey man, how are you doing with these latest changes that we've had? Or how are you doing under, you know, isolation and stuff like that? I can't stress enough that when I see insider attack, when I see all of that FUD around insider attack from vendors, that insider attacks are organizationally made. They're not a cybersecurity problem. They're a cybersecurity event when that person becomes a problem, but inside of themselves, you're not going to find a solution to the insider threat problem in the technology space. You just simply aren't, because at the end of the day, if your IT systems are so good, I'm just going to set fire to the building, you know? So, you know, I feel like this one is a lot of extra hype. And, you know, again, it comes down to, if you can't trust your people, then, you know, what the hell are you doing, right? Unaffiliated attacks, low visibility. Really the one for me is this group, CloudHopper. They figured out how to do cybercrime right, because what they did is they used managed service providers. Now, managed service providers are kind of funny in that they advertise all over their websites who they're supplying, right, as part of their marketing strategy. Not a problem in itself, but if you're working in a military-industrial complex space, you might not want to put that you have all of these super important military-industrial customers as an advertising feature, because one of the problems with managed service providers is they don't eat their own dog food. Okay, and what do I mean by that? Is that they will happily sell all sorts of cybersecurity to their customers, but in them of themselves, they like it to be a little loosey-goosey and anything goes. So cyber criminals, allegedly Chinese actors, decided that they were going to build out a whole campaign in 2015. This campaign had been going on for a long time before that. It only came to light after some amazing research into this, that basically compromised the MSPs and then used the MSP's own infrastructure to do all of the data infiltration. Low visibility attacks generally are going to be one of two areas: intellectual property theft, right? Or ransom of data, right? I've breached you, I have your data, it's really compromising, give me a bunch of money, okay? And if money ain't forthcoming, and if you're a law firm, all of that data ends up going to the International Consortium of International Journalists for publication. And that's how we got to the Panama Papers, okay? So here, it's a classic example of how that low visibility attack can be absolutely catastrophic to an organization. All right. I'm not, again, you've got the deck, and I'm not going to go through in great depth about this, but this talks a little bit about the major indictment of APT10, APT Cloud Hopper. They appear later on in cybercrime history, because there are some folks that in the security research community believe that APT10 were the ones that lifted a whole bunch of Cisco intellectual property and gave it to everybody's favorite 5G tech company, Huawei, right? So one of the big beefs that the Americans, maybe potentially the Five Eyes community has, is that they're getting even for shit that got done a long time ago by APT10 that then became and gave that intellectual property to Huawei. So some controversy around that. Unaffiliated actor, high visibility attack. This is what we see all the time, okay? This is a case of where those Outlook web access and stuff like that is getting breached. We saw this very recently in an indictment that got handed down yesterday for a crew that basically used good old SQL Map and ended up basically smashing their way into a bunch of credit card data. And it was quite hilarious because these kind of attacks have been going on for a very long time. And essentially, it was all undetected. I posted a link to the story on my Twitter feed. I've got the indictment if you're interested in reading through the indictment. But I'm telling you, what popped out to me so much from this indictment was the fact that a simple pen test, you downloading a free tool like Zap or SQL Map and running it against your web applications would have told you that you were vulnerable. And the fact that these companies were taking PCI DSS data and we're basically doing self-attestations because they weren't of the right volume level to have to go through an audit process, shows me the huge weakness that we have when people come to you and say, oh, we're compliant, we're fine. They're fucking not, okay? And the evidence suggests very highly that compliance does not equal security, but security done properly should give you compliance. Mike, thoughts?
Well, amen to that, brother. That's the first thing I'll say. But it's absolutely right. You know, organizations that take a compliance-based approach to security are never going to be secure because they're there simply to tick boxes and get a certificate that they can stick on the wall, which they'll also then stick on their website, and they'll get customers, and then they'll get breached, and then it all goes to shit. Taking a security-based approach, as Ian quite correctly points out, means that you're doing the right things. So what you're doing is you're taking people, processes, and technology approach in terms of controls, and you're applying them appropriately based on the risk that you've thought about carefully to your organization. And when we talk about risk, we talk about the things that can cause the company the worst possible nightmares, like company closure, major financial loss, reputational damage, staff cuts, and so on and so forth. And then pair that back to what actually could cause that to happen in the first place. Then apply controls around it. Okay, and that's the bottom line. It's as simple as that.
Thanks, Mike, because you know what? I think everyone here understands how important understanding what their external attack surface is, and the fact that if they don't start looking at it, somebody else will, you know, out there. So I love this guy, and this is the one guy I'd love to visit in prison and just sit down with him and ask him why he was so stupid, okay? Now, this guy, Nathan Wyatt, I'll bring you guys up to speed on him. Tons of cyber fraud charges. Before that, tons of old school shenanigans, fisticuffs, Donnybrooks, and criminal activity, right? Nathan Wyatt. Now, what you're seeing is you're saying, okay, Ian, how come a British cyber criminal has an American indictment? That's a very good question. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Because right now he's in an American prison, and we're going to find out why. The reason why is this guy decided that he was going to break into, among other places, a couple American businesses, but Pippa Middleton's iCloud account. Now, here's the thing. Pippa has a bit of a relationship, i.e. the sister of the Duchess herself, Kate. Now, here's a little thing that you need to know about the UK. And when it comes to the standards, I would say, of enforcement. The first thing you got to know is you do not screw with the royal family or anyone associated with the royal family, because there is literally an entire department in Scotland Yard waiting to come down on your face, okay? So he ended up getting the full, I'm going to say, the brunt of Scotland Yard, because he had that as his chosen target. And the idea was he broke into her iCloud account, got a bunch of her pictures, and was going to sell them to the papers. Now, despite what you want to talk about the UK paparazzi being out of control and stuff like that, the papers were like, hey, we don't want a piece of that. That sounds terrible. We're going to call our friends at Scotland Yard, okay? So literally this guy, did it from his non-burner phone and sent an email, okay? Unbelievable, right? Well, it gets way worse for this lad. So what happens is yeah, he goes through the court system. Now, one of the things is when you target a royal, any judge in the UK is going to probably have a little bit of a, you know what, it's a royal, so I'm not exactly going to hang on any sort of little intricacies of law when it comes to the search warrant, right? This was the bend over and grab your ankles moment for this dude, because when you screw with a royal, the police are going to come in and they're going to be pretty, I'm going to say, angry and efficient. Now, it turns out they got enough evidence on his box to support the claims that he had hacked some American stuff. So the Americans got busy with the old IBM Selectric typewriter there, typed up a little indictment and said, you mind if we bring him over at all to kind of deal with this in our special way? And the UK went, dusted, see ya. In fact, we will buy you a ticket, and it's one way, because this guy isn't coming back for 25 years. Now, the sad reality is when you have such a giant POS as this guy, the justice system of the UK is not nearly as heavy-handed as it should be with this kind of idiot. So in a way, you could argue that the UK just kind of went, you know what? It's an American problem, and we're going to let them solve it American style. So good luck with him. Just a little thing about the bad guys that I wanted to drop with you, that bad guy infrastructure, and this is one of the problems that we're really faced with, is incredibly cheap. To get started in cybercrime, you need only around 30 or 40 quid a month, really, to get going. This is one of the major problems with cybercrime today, is that there is such a huge crime as a service infrastructure for all your cyber criminal needs. It's like a Walmart for a supervillain, okay? You can get anything you need in order to support your cybercrime activity. And we've seen operations costing the cyber criminals as low as $34 a month, which, I mean, you can't even maybe get a TV for that from Carhouse Warehouse.
And by that, we're talking about botnets, we're talking about C2 infrastructure for ransomware attacks and all that kind of thing for beaconing. And yeah, you're right. Absolutely.
Great dashboards, all your BI, business analytics, all your money laundering, all there. Definitely. Okay, so there's a bunch of dangerous places on the internet, and these are what we like to call the dark web, okay? Now, a lot of this stuff, if you believe it or not, a lot of this stuff is already out there on the internet, and it's not necessarily behind Onion, like for access by Tor anyways. Because here's the problem with the Tor network as if you're a cyber criminal. You have to figure out how to teach guys like Nathan how to use a Tor browser, okay? And they are not the brightest people, because think about this. Most of them are career criminals, and a lot of them have addiction issues. And essentially, they're not tech workers, okay? So we're really talking about the idea that if you hide your cyber criminal enterprise behind the onions and in the Tor network, you have a very limited cybercrime audience in order to sell your wares to or sell your data. So in a lot of cases, what you need to do is you need to have a foot in the legitimate internet, right? Maybe probably not indexing your services on Google, which has happened, right? If we go way back to Silk Road 1.0, that was one of the things that gave them up, is that they advertised, whoopsie, on the public internet about all the really evil shit that they were doing, right? And nothing will draw the ire of international cybercrime fighters more than child exploitation material. So if you have that mixed into your cybercrime operations, then chances are that all international law enforcement will come down you, as they should, like a ton of bricks. But we can see that a lot of stuff is happening both in the internet itself and in those more restricted access areas of the internet as well. So much how to as well, right? Just the other day, Cyjax, one of our researchers, stumbled across a crime as a service. I will teach you all about carding for like $19.95 a month, right? Unbelievable. We see a lot of things, drugs, we see passports, we see, you know, hitmen for hire, which again are probably a whole bunch of law enforcement organizations advertising their services on these forums. But you can see that there is a whole bunch of criminality that's going on, and crime really has gone almost 100% digital since we started. A lot of this is driven by Bitcoin. And you know, we all know about Bitcoin. I mean, I joke continuously on Twitter about how I feel it's like a giant Ponzi scheme, and at some point it'll all fall apart. And I was joking about, I've already got my exit strategy planned of, we were hacked, and that's why all the Bitcoin is gone. But as you can imagine, Bitcoin is really a representation of energy. This is a great way of explaining to people that don't understand what Bitcoin is. And you just say, it is about like a battery in a lot of ways, because it takes a bunch of money to do the calculations to create the Bitcoin. So when you're explaining to people, they don't really need to know about all the intricacies of the blockchain and the distributed ledger technology that's behind it. They need to understand that you're creating something out of nothing, but you are using energy to create that. And you can see why it's pretty popular as a target, where you have basically something that takes about 2.6 thousand pounds and goes right now, I think, for around 5,000 pounds. So you can see that the differential, and the easiest way to get a hold of lots of Bitcoin is to steal somebody else's Bitcoin, right? But we can see that there's all sorts of different crazy schemes involving Bitcoin, right? Bypassing electrical meters, hijacking computers. A bunch of folks just got done for using a supercomputer. What was it called? The Archer. The reason the Archer was attacked was to mine Bitcoin. I love it, man. That's just amazing. Break into hosted computers, make them mine Bitcoin, use a work computer, and then, of course, the famous Iranian attacks, which are basically North Korean attacks going after Bitcoin wallets on people's endpoints. Right, and I got involved early on this when myself and Scott Helm verified that plugin for a website basically was compromised, and a whole bunch of people visiting their website, the ICO's website, could have downloaded a crypto mining program onto their own computer. And ever since CoinHive went belly up, thank God they did, because honestly, they were all going to get arrested at some point. But since CoinHive went belly under, we've seen a huge drop in the amount of Bitcoin mining activities. It happens, but it's certainly not as prevalent as it was. And here we can see.
Just on that one, Ian. Sorry, before you continue with Comrade Kim, going back a slide, if you wouldn't mind. The the attack you're describing there that you unearthed, actually, as you mentioned. So this was around 4,500 UK public sector websites that were using a JavaScript plugin called Browse Aloud. And what that was basically a text-to-speech plugin that provided, obviously, people with visual impairment the ability to browse websites. And that was an upstream Java poisoning attack that happened. But the irony was, as you touched on there, was that the ICO's website was a victim of this particular attack. Yeah. So anybody can be a victim of it. And this is probably my area of the world, a little bit more around application security. But yeah, so this is about having good secure coding and making sure that you are doing all the right things on your websites to ensure that the code that you are consuming, that you're not writing, is properly sanitized and looked after.
And this goes back to all sorts of things that, you know, in the wake of this, right, there was a big hoo and ha over content security policy and server resource integrity or sub resource integrity. And these are important topics that, you know, Mike has covered, Sean Wright, another beer farmer, John Oppendecker, and of course, the man himself, the man with the perfect hair in information security, Scott Helm, talks about continuously. What's interesting is this back in 2018 was a harbinger for the Magecart attacks, which again targeted JavaScript, malicious JavaScript being inserted onto your infrastructure without your knowledge, obviously, right?
British Airways.
Yeah, British Airways. Okay, so just wanted to point out about how Iran and North Korea are big into the stealing Bitcoin game. There's been a bunch of indictments for people doing that. I kind of want to just quickly kind of sum up on this one issue around Bitcoin, which is truly kind of revealing. Again, it was revealed in that indictment that just came down. But this from the Mueller indictment indicated to me that our boys, Paris, Josiah, and Dalton, who brought us the Myra bot code, ended up working for the FBI instead of languishing in prison because they're pretty smart guys. You're also smart enough to publicly reveal their code way before they were indicted, thus bringing into a probable reasonable doubt issue on them. However, really smart guys ended up working for the Department of Justice, and they have managed to crack the idea of tracking Bitcoin from creation to what it's being purchased for, who the wallet belongs to the person who may own that particular wallet. So the idea that Bitcoin is an anonymous currency is now somewhat disputed by multiple indictments from the Department of Justice, and not to mention the IRS, who has a very strong interest in finding Americans that have Bitcoin that haven't paid taxes on that Bitcoin. So there is such a huge focus right now on that kind of stuff. I mentioned indictments a lot. You guys, again, will have access to the deck. Indictments of cyber criminals tell us what they do. And this slide I put up there because when it gets really bad in cybercrime, it forces organizations to choose different paths. And I think this one, when the Izzy ad-Din el-Qassam cyber fighters, which would be really cool to have on a t-shirt, members of the Syrian Electronic Army hacked Twitter, put out a tweet about the White House, an attack on the White House and the injury of the president. It forced Twitter to roll out two-factor authentication. That's the reason why they did it, because there's a giant dip in the stock market when it went out on Twitter from the Associated Press, no less, that there is an attack on the White House. So, you know, we talked about that. I've got another one that I'll rail against when I have more time, because I think I'm coming up to the last moments here. I'm going to go for about 5 more minutes. Is that cool, John? Yeah.
If I find the unmute, yeah, that's fine. Cheers.
Okay, cool.
Thanks.
So what is Cyjack's working on? So one of my pet projects is, I am an ex-intelligence guy. I've worked for 2 intelligence organizations, the Canadian Military Intelligence and then the RCMP in criminal intelligence. And what I want to know is when I'm going to get attacked and who's going to come and attack me. Those are the two things. And what can I do about that? Obviously, right? But as soon as I know that there's going to be an attack, I'm going to talk to people like Mike and go, I know they're going to attack my web server. Mike, what can I do about that, right? And Mike will come up with a whole bunch of recommendations. But here's the deal. Pretty much all of these attacks have a standard pattern, right? And one of them is the registration of a typo squatting domain. We're talking about standard attacks, not really APT actors, but kind of APT actors. But for now, let's just let this go, right? So the registering of a domain. So if you're monitoring in your organization for typo squatting domains, which you should, and there's plenty of CTI availability out there, if you are monitoring for that, then you will have an indicator, because when somebody registers a domain called BA-Ways, okay, and you're BA.com, you might want to, that might set off some alarm bells in the old CTI shop, right? Why would somebody be doing that? And then you look into it and you go, wow, that's really cool. Was there a change ticket for this? Is this a legitimate thing that we're doing that maybe the IT department or the security department is the last people to know? No, it turns out it's on Lithuanian infrastructure and it was registered through a Romanian domain name service. That's odd. Because one of the cool things is that the certificate issuing for any website or any domain, sorry, not website, but any domain, is a public thing. So if you are actually monitoring the certificate transparency logs, you could find the registration of a certificate. So my rule of thumb is if somebody registers a domain that's like my domain, and then they register a certificate, and then I ping, maybe I do some end mapping, and I find that they've actually set up infrastructure, I am now going to get really curious about what comes next. And what comes next usually is some sort of phishing attack on your organization and a bunch of extra supporting cast members, if you will, of C2 infrastructure and a payload repo, right? So all of this stuff pretty much happens as a template, cybercrime as a service. And if I can build a service or teach people on how to recognize these discrete steps, man, you can just sidestep attacks on your organization, right? Because before this happens, you should be looking at, hey, do we have a content security policy? Do we have security.txt on our website so that if a security researcher finds something that's a little bit dodgy, right? Like that Apple's OAuth 0 day that the guy got 100K from Apple for as part of a bug bounty, right? You can get in touch with the right people and you can actually be way proactive against this type of attack. So that's what I really enjoy. So just a few quick slides on fixing the problem. And again, it's not an easy problem to fix, but you have plenty of resources out there, especially if you send the beer farmers or myself or Mike or Sean or John a DM. We are happy to help you out. So one of the
Ian, sorry, mate, before you continue, I think there might be somebody else in the lobby.
Oh, okay, let me take a look. All right, yeah, okay. Victor seemed to be going in and out a little bit tonight. He must be having a few internet problems. Okay, so I just want to say, one of the coolest things about the UK is they have a government service that you can sign your organization up for that will externally scan your organization and monitor the shadow server network about whether or not you may have vulnerable services exposed. And this is a huge free service. And basically, I recommend this for organizations to sign themselves up through the National Cyber Security Center for this service, and you get a cool Excel spreadsheet with your IPs or domains. Now, one little caveat about this. If your domains are third-party hosted, and what I mean by that is, say, there's a fine hosting company like Zen, right? And you might have your website on a server that has a dozen, 20, 30, 40, 50 other websites on it. The shadow server may flag your domain with a vulnerability because it may look at the IP address and see something like SSH open to the internet on your domain, and there's really nothing you can do about it. So what I find is give them IP addresses of your critical infrastructure or your ASN or your CIDR, and have them look just at the IP addresses space, because it does sometimes get confusing if you're having domains or subdomains resolved to third-party hosting companies, okay? In another way, though, it's kind of funny because that's where you might find infrastructure that has long since been abandoned by your organization on somebody's third-party hosting service. All right, and I think I have one more. This is the other thing. Everybody out there, okay, you should be blocking 445 to the internet. If you're not blocking 445 to the internet, you're gonna get humped by something like NotPetya, WannaCry, or Eternal Blue. It's pretty straightforward. Put a firewall rule in there at your edge, blocking 445 and alerting you to anything outbound on 445. Because if something is coming out of your organization on port 445, you're humped. You have a very serious problem. The reason I put this slide up there is that is a 2012. So what? I'm going to say it went end of life cycle in 2017. So this is an example of a very simple small business router that is one firewall rule that you can add to deny an alert on outbound traffic to 445. It will save your company's life. And then when you do know that somebody's come after you, please visit Decent Security and do all of these great things to torture the people that are trying to take a poke at you, right? If you find a typo squatting domain and you verify that it's not legit, then register it, let everybody know about it. If you find IOCs or IP addresses of command and control because you're Wiresharking out a piece of malware, put them into VirusTotal. Because what you do and what you find makes it a heck of a lot easier for the rest of us out there that are trying to fight the bad guys. And that's me. Thank you. And now we can have some Q&A action if you like.